from 3 in the reverse order. So what does 3 say? F is surjective, meaning F is an onto function. So this means that the range of F is B. So the rank of S is equal to the dimension of the range of F, and since the range of F is B, so the rank of F is N. So by using rank nullity theorem again, rank plus nullity should be equal to N, and rank is N, so nullity would be 0. And we had that a nice result that if nullity is 0 if and only if F is 1 function. So this means that F is 1 so what we have proved that if F is on 2, F is also 1 so it means that F is surjective. So we have proved that 3 and 1 are equivalent. So in this way we have proved that all these equations are equivalent. 1 implies 2, 1 implies 3. We got from definition of 1, 2 implies 1 and 2 implies 3 implies 1 we had proved earlier. So in a way we have proved that all these equations are equivalent. Any doubts? Okay, so move on to problem number 7. This is the last problem in the tutorial section, and next will be practice problems. This is a nice problem, and what it asks is to prove is that we have a linear transformation T1 from the vector space U to V, and we have another linear transformation T2 from vector space V1 to W. What do we have to prove? That if T2 is 1, 1, then rank of T2 of T1 is the same as rank of T1. So how do we go about it? Rank of linear map means the dimension of its image. Image and range have been used interchangeably in this tutorial. So range of T2 of T1, it's the same as T2 of range of T1. So how this happened? Range of T2 of T1 is basically all those values that T2 of T1 can result in when T2 of T1 is applied to some vector in U. And what does the right hand side say? Right hand side says range of T1. What is range of T1? You give it is a set of all vectors that can be achieved by applying T1 to W. So in T2 of T1, T2 will be getting inputs only those which are achievable by T1. So T2 will get something of the form of T1 of some U. So basically input of T2 is only the range of T1. Think of these in terms of sets of vectors, and you will see that this range of T2 of T1 is simply T2 of range of T1. So let's just assume that V1, V2 up to Vk forms a basis of the range of T1. Then from question 5. Question 5 part 1 said that if we have a linearly independent set B, which is a subset of this, of what is being in of the domain of a linear transformation, then the set that we get after applying the linear transformation is also linearly independent. So B is the range of T1 and it is obviously a subset of V because T goes from U to V. So range of T1 is a subset of V and B is a linearly independent set that is a subset of V. So applying T2 would also mean that this set that we get T2 of V1, T2 of V2 up to T2 of Vk is linearly independent. For any x that belongs to range of T1, it can be written as a linear combination of Vi's for some unique scalar alpha because these V1, V2 up to Vk, they form a basis of the range of T1. So T2 of x is basically this, like you use the linearity of T2 and pull out alphas to get this summation. So what does this mean? This means that T2 of this belongs to the linear span of T2 of B. So this means that T2 of B spans the range of T2 of P1. Hence it is So it spans the range of this. So it is a basis because it's a linearly independent set and it spans the image of T2 of T1. So it means that it is a basis for the image of T2 of T1, and the image could be written as a set in this form, like take U, the set, the complete vector space U as input to T1. So the dimension of image of T2 of T1 is equal to the dimension of T2 of B, which is equal to the number of elements in T2 of B and which is equal to the number of elements in B. And number of elements in B simply means the dimension of the range of R1, because by definition B is the basis of R1, range of T1, sorry. So all these three things are equal. So the dimension of image of T2 of T1 is same as dimension of image of T1, and that is what we had to prove. So again, I don't see any questions. I'll just quickly go through a few practice problems now. First practice problem is similar to a practice problem, tutorial problem 1 and 2. We just need to find rank and nullity. So I'll just quickly skip over it because we are running out of time. Problem 15 again is just an application of the rank nullity theorem and some basic inequalities. So we have an m cross n matrix where m is less than equal to n, and we need to show that the space of solutions of Ax equal to 0 has a dimension that is at least n minus m. So m is less than n. So that means that rank of A would be less than equal to n. Rank of A would obviously be less than or equal to the number of rows or the number of columns, depending on whichever is small. Dimension or space of solution of Ax equal to 0 is nothing else than the nullity of A. The space of solution of Ax equal to 0 is the null space of A, and its dimension is the nullity of A. And by rank nullity theorem, rank of A plus nullity of A is equal to n. So using this inequality and this rank nullity theorem, we can prove what we wanted to prove. Next problem was that we were given two linear transformations, and we had to prove that they were 1, 1 and onto, and that we also had to find the inverse of these transformations. So the first, I'll just do the first one, and the second one I've put it in the slides. You can have a look at it later. So first is a R2 to R2 transformation defined as T of x1 x2 is equal to 5x1 plus 3x2. So again, as we have done in previous problems, we find the matrix that is associated with T1. So A will be this matrix, and you can verify. Multiply this 5, 0, 0, 3 matrix, apply this to x1, x2, and you'll get 5x1, 3x2. Note that A is already in a row echelon form, and it has rank 2. So this means that nullity of A is 0 because rank is equal to 2, which is equal to the number of columns in A. And hence, by again using the important property that nullity of A is 0 if and only if f is 1, 1. So we get that f is 1, 1. We find the inverse of A. So this inverse that we have calculated, this could be calculated by using the formula of adjoint or by using like the elementary row operations, Gauss-Jordan methods and all that. Any method you use, and you find that the inverse of A is this. So basically this is the matrix that is associated with the inverse of T1. And it also gives us a formula for the onto, like why f is onto. So this was problem 9 part 2. It is similar to the problem that we had discussed. We just need to find A, then its inverse, and use the theorem proved in class to say that f is 1, 1. Now problem number 12. Problem number 12, part 1 is again that important property. Please go through it. It is a very important result that a linear transformation is 1, if and only if its null space consists of only the zero vector. The next is, say that we have this set of vectors u1, u2 up to un, and they span the domain of T. Then the range of T is spanned by these vectors T of u1, T of u2 up to T of un. So how do we do that? First we prove it in the forward direction. For any u, vector u that belongs to the domain of T, we can write u as a linear combination of alpha of these ui's as they span, because these ui's they span the range, the domain of T. And these alphas won't be scalar again, because it is not necessary that u1, u2 up to un form a basis of u. They just span u. It's not necessary that they are linearly independent. So these scalars are not really unique. T of u could be written as T of this summation, and using linearity of T, you just pull it out. So this basically becomes a linear combination of T of ui's. So it belongs to the linear span of T of ui's. So this proves that range of T is a subset of linear span of T of ui's. Similarly, we prove it other way around. Say we have X, which belongs to the linear span of T of ui's. So X could be written as a linear combination of T of ui's because it belongs to the span of T of ui's basically by definition. And this thing X could be written as T of some summation of this ui's, because T is a linear transformation. So we see that X belongs to the range of T, because T applied to some vector gives us X. So this means that X belongs to the range of T. Hence the linear span of T of ui's is a subset of range of T. So we have proved this and this. A range of T is a subset of linear span of T of ui's, and linear span of T of ui's is a subset of range of T. So these two sets must be equal then, and hence we have proved what we wanted to prove. So next, any questions? No. So I'll just move on to the last problem that I wanted to discuss. So what does this say? Let f and g be two linear maps which commute with each other. What does commuting means? It means that f of g of some vector is same as g of f of some vector. In order for this to happen, the range and domain, and range, these two things, these two vector spaces should be equal. So this is a property that holds for f and g, and we need to show that f of image of g is a subset of image of g, and similar formula for the null space. So first we'll prove it for the image of g. So since g of f equal to f of g, the image of g of f is equal to image of f of g. Now if, as we had done in problem 7 of the tutorial sheet, image of g of f is basically equal to g of image of f. Think of g of image of f as like a set of vectors, and you will be able to get an intuitive idea of why this is true. Now, what is image of f? Image of f is basically all those values that we can get by applying f to a vector that belongs to V. And in those vectors that we get after applying f to some vector, they will lie in V, they will belong to V, because that is what lies on this right hand side in the definition of f. So this means that image of f is a subset of V. So applying g to both sides, g of image of f is subset of g of v. So what is g of v? G of v is basically the image of g. It's all those vectors that we can get by applying g to some vectors in v. So what we have proved? We have proved that g of image of f is a subset of image of g, And here we had shown that image of G of F is equal to G of image of F. So we have proved that image of G of F is a subset of image of G. And image of F of G is equal to image of G of F. So this expression gives rise to this expression. Image of F of G is a subset of image of G. And by this first expression, second expression, sorry, that image of G of F is equal to G times image of F, we can say similarly for image of F of G that image of F of G is the same as F of image of G. And that is a subset of image of G. This is what we had to prove. Now what is the next part? Next part is F of null space of G is a subset of null space of G. So let A be any vector that belongs to F of null space of G. What does this mean? This means that there exists some x belonging to null space of G such that F of x is A and G of x is 0 because x belongs to the null space of G, so G of x is 0. So now we have F of x equal to A. Apply G to both sides, so you get G of F of x equal to G of x. G of F of x is same as F of G of x. So we get F of G of x equal to G of A. And G of A is equal to 0 because x belongs to the null space of G. So this turns into F of 0. So what is F of 0? F of 0 is 0. Why? F of 0 is 0 because F belongs to F is a linear transformation, and in linear transformation F of 0 has to be 0, otherwise it won't be a linear transformation. So what do we get? We get G of A equal to 0, which implies that A belongs to null space of G. So what we have proved? Any vector that belongs to F of null space of G also belongs to null space of G. So F of null space of G is a subset of null space of G, and that is what we had to prove. So that brings us to the end of this